Could you give us a brief presentation of who you are and a bit about your YouTube channel?
Yeah, so I started consuming a lot of podcasts. Well, I started consuming some podcasts about 10 years ago, and then 4 years ago, a lot more. And I would notice on the suggestion side of YouTube that there were other podcasts that might be interesting. But I would put it in the back of my mind that maybe in the future I would go look over them and see what happens. And then it hardly ever happened. And so, but occasionally I would, and they would be interesting. And so I was thinking, if there was a show that could introduce us to a new podcast or some other podcast that's going on that you're either a fan of or that you are interested in maybe watching, we could provide some interesting details about the show for the fans, like how the show got started, some extra details. And then if people hadn't heard of the show before, we could introduce them to the hosts and show them, the ropes and get to know the podcaster better so that they might choose to go watch their videos. And so we try to provide links to something that we talk about, like if they've appeared on Steve Pineker's show or something like that, or some other venue, or if there's some other podcast that they have that they've done that they're proud of, or something like that, or their first episode. And so we try to, get more into. We say that we honor creators and the experience around their creation.
I would like to uh, ask you, when you started Later Daily Digest, I was lucky enough to be one of the both the first people to watch the pilot you released with Steve Pineker, as well as one of the first people featured, and I thank you for that. And I was very interested by the concept because uh, when you started, you mentioned, as you say now, that you honor creators, and in your channel you have had guests like myself or Stephen Murphy or Rick Bennett who are believing Latter-day Saints, and you also have people from the post-Mormon community, maybe too many to name. But I wanted to ask you, so maybe we could get to know you a little better. What's your relationship with Mormonism? Um, what's your connection with it? Can you tell us your story of maybe if you grew up with it, and if you have maybe moved away from it? What's your relationship with that?
Yeah, so I was, we'll say, born into the church. My parents were both members, but they weren't married or sealed in the temple, rather. And so they tried their best. My dad was what we used to call a Jack Mormon, someone who doesn't go to church, and maybe smokes and drinks, and that was my dad. And my mom had five boys, and she tried to get us all ready for church, and we would go, as often as possible. And when it came time to serving a mission, I was too afraid to go. It was too much of a thing to, leave my family for that length of time. But I thought I would stay home and, instruct my younger brothers on elements of the gospel and what Mormonism was. And then I was able to get married in the temple when I was about 24, and we had about four kids. I mean, exactly four kids. And we had three of our children go on missions. And then for myself, um, I had been questioning some things in church history and wondering about them. I felt I was taught one way, and yet most of the historians would say that there's more to the story that I wasn't taught. And I had, 50 years of Sunday school, so I figured, the church had a chance to tell me some of these things, and it just made me seem more interested in church history. And so, um, I had listened to Mormon Stories in 2013 and was actually, even though my faith was wavering, we'll say, Mormon Stories helped me stay going to church for a couple of years. And I was able to, you know, sit next to my wife and, consider it a time well spent with my family instead of wondering about the differences I had with either theology or history or anything like that. But I had learned about the race and the priesthood issue. And so I decided to search more into that and came to the conclusion that God always loved all his children and that racism was the main cause for the discrimination against blacks. And so it was the first time I ever thought that the leaders had maybe done something wrong. And then I thought, well, God loves all his children. He loves women too. And maybe women should be able to have the priesthood. And so I did some more research and studying on that. And I would make predictions to my family saying, hey, sometime women are going to be ordained. And I joined what was called the Ordained Women Movement. At least I became interested in what they had to say. And so once one of the leaders of the Ordained Women Movement was excommunicated, I decided that I could not pay tithing anymore. And then when John DeLynn got excommunicated, I thought that people shouldn't get excommunicated for bringing people on a show who had thoughts and had experiences that they would just describe. And so I thought that was unfair. And so I lost interest in attending. I have kept my membership, and I do go a few times a year. I try to stay up with what's going on in our ward and in our stake. And so, but I feel that if in America, and I don't know what they have in other countries, but there's something called full disclosure, and that is where if you buy real estate, you have to inform the buyer things that are wrong with the house. And then we have informed consent, where in medical services for either drugs or an operation, you're told all the things that might happen, right? You're given information ahead of time so you can make the best decision possible for you. And I thought, well, if these things are good principles in real estate or in medical services, why not where the eternities are involved? And so there's your show that tries to explain some things, and people should have all the information. They shouldn't be withheld. Information shouldn't be withheld from people, and people should be able to make their own decisions. And so my idea for the podcast was, to honor the creators as an angle. It doesn't matter. Their faith journey is their own, and that could come out as part of what got them in a podcast, whether it's a faithful journey into podcasting or whether it's a like you say, that sort of on their way out, a faith transition got them into podcasting, or sometimes they're very vocal and express deep concerns. So I hope the church can be better. It can grow. It can learn from people who express themselves and talk about issues that how the ways the church can be more healthy for people. And so I have hope. There's a podcast that I did an interview with. His name is Peter Bleakley, and his is called The Mormon Civil War: The Christians versus the Pharisees. And so he talks about how there are people who are the letter of the law type of people, and they want obedience and control. And then there are people who he feels are Christians, where they want to express love for one another and do all they can to help each other out. And so that is the situation I think the church is in right now. And the more information members have, the better they are at assessing what they should do. And my show helps point people to all kinds of different podcasts. So that's where I am right now.
Sometimes people really like to think that all Catholics are this way, all atheists are this way, all ex-Mormons are this way. And I just want to sort of show that people aren't the same. right? We aren't closed. We think differently. And when it comes to uh, dialogue and this relationship between maybe church members and people who maybe no longer believe and once were believers, I always hear this, and I just wanted to ask you what you think of it, and so we could maybe get past the stereotype, right? That you heard this before. But people usually say, if someone lives a church, uh, why talk about it, right? Why not just leave it alone? That's the maybe the main thing I've heard online. And I just wanted to ask you, your content creation is still Mormon based, and people say, but why? Like sort of people try to maybe paint the idea that the people who love the church are obsessed to some degree. Uh, I don't agree with that, but I hear that a lot. So I wanted to ask you, what would you say to someone who has that idea?
So I'd say by far the most common reaction to either thinking the church no longer works for them or thinking that the church isn't true or whatever, whoever stops going to church, the most common thing is that they just stop. They go about their day. They have an extra day on the weekend to, do their own lives, figure out their own life's pleasures, and they just do that, right? But some people do feel like more of a, we'll say, could be a sense of responsibility. It could be something else. Like, if somebody buys a, a microwave oven, right? Before they buy it, they're going to look for reviews, right? And people aren't all going to review it. That some people will say, "Oh, I had a good experience with this oven," or "I had a bad experience," and we want to see the reviews, but they might sell a million microwave ovens, and there might be only like say 1,000 reviews of it. And so some people just they have an oven, they just use it, and they don't care to share what their experience is. And other people think, oh yeah, it has a bad timer, or it doesn't do what I want it to do. It doesn't have good settings. And other people say, oh, this is the best one I've ever had. And all those reviews could be for the same product, right? And so everybody has different experiences. And so I think there are some people who leave the church that feel that they were harmed. And so they want to maybe alert others to the harm that they experienced. And that's not necessarily going to be everyone's, experience of the harm. And other people might, like myself, think, well, I would have benefited from having a better history, lessons and discussions. And that would have made church more interesting, for me. And so maybe they want to delve and dive into the history situations and things that we're learning now that maybe 50 years ago not very many people knew about. And so the age of information, there's a lot of information out there. And you know some people are bitter, and some people are concerned for their relatives that are still attending, and they want the church to be a safe place. And other people are just doing what feels right for them. They just leave. They don't have apologies for their relatives or their friends. They just say, hey, I'm not interested. And for those people, the visiting teachers or, you know, ministers, whatever what it's called now, come to their houses, and the people might be friendly, or they might get on, you know, let people know they don't want to be visited. And everybody is in a different place. I'll just say that.
One of the things that I always hear from people who know Eugene is how good you are at creating like networks and talking to people and getting them to maybe come on the show or even before you had a channel to just talk to them and have that sense of community. And I think that skill is pretty good. I try to have it myself. I don't think I'm very good yet, but I hear that you are. And I see that you have met many different people from different parts of the states and even the world. I see that you just got Matthew Harris uh, in his most recent book, Second Class Saints, that talks about what you just mentioned, right? Race and the priesthood and some political even background from the time. And I wanted to ask you how, I don't know, why do you enjoy creating connections and how do you do it? Sometimes people get overwhelmed, but it seems that you find it easy.
Yeah, I've sort of wondered that myself. I mean, I'm a middle child, right? So I have two older brothers and two younger brothers. And I've heard people say that the middle children try to, go along to get along or try to keep everybody happy, people pleasers or something like that. And I remember feeling as a young kid, maybe certain parts of my body grew faster than other parts. Maybe I had a big nose or big ears or something and thought I had, flaws. And so I was shy. That made me feel shy. Or I had a good haircut or a bad haircut or good clothes or not very good clothes, sometimes. And so I always felt that limited some of my interaction with my fellow students, but I did have, most of the people at church were used to me, whether I was well dressed or not. And so there was always that, but I wanted to have, more friends. And so I remember trying to do things to develop relationships with people in high school. Like there were these little collectible cards, like there were baseball cards, and there was something called wacky packages. And it was like funny ads sort of about a product, and it would change the name, and there would be some humor, and I'd stick them on my binder, just like a lot of people stick stickers on their laptops nowadays. I'm thinking about that now, and so I would share that experience with people. Like I'd point them out, and people would laugh, and it'd start a conversation, and then I tried to, go to dances, but I was too shy to ask a lot of girls. So I'd have like the same five girls I would ask every time. And I was afraid to expand my horizons that way. And so I sort of went back into my shell. And then I had a job with an American football club at a major university in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And I had been working on the field, helping out with the officials and other people. And the team would have, good teams some year and bad teams some other year. And they were college students, and you just never know what was going to happen. And one year, about 15 years ago, a group of recruits all got connected, and they all decided to come to the college to make it better. And the connection was Facebook. And so that perked my interest in Facebook. And so I decided to join Facebook. What is Facebook? And I would see people with like 100 friends, and I'd think, how can you have 100 friends? That's just amazing. And so I got better and better at connecting people. And back then it would allow you to connect people with common interests. And I started doing that with fellow high school students. Since I had two older brothers and two younger brothers, I knew all their friends, and I knew a lot of the friends of friends. And so I would see two people that weren't connected, that were in the same age group, and I thought they should be friends on Facebook. They're on Facebook. Why aren't they friends? And so I'd connect them, and I started doing that. And then for political reasons, I thought it'd be good to have a political network of people that had the same beliefs. And then I just carried that forward into the Mormon world, and I just started making connections. And I went to my very first Mormon History Association 2 years ago, and Sunstone the same summer. And I took a lot of pictures of interesting people and things, and I started using that as a way of befriending people. I would see other Facebook users that had maybe 30 or 50 or 100 common friends, and I would say, hi, I went to Sunstone recently, here's a few pictures I took, or something like that. And if they were interested, then I asked if they wanted to stay connected. We have a lot of good friends in common. And so I started doing the network before I even thought of doing content creation. Like but that's helped me a lot. Once I had the network, I might have 1,500 Mormon or former Mormon friends on Facebook, and that helps me connect with other people. Not everybody is willing to accept a direct message that comes from a stranger, but enough are to like keep me happy. But sometimes when I'm not getting information from people at a rate that I want, I feel like even though I have 1,500 Mormony Facebook friends, that I'm lonely because I'm not getting the latest news or something. So that's kind of a funny thing.
You were mentioning Sunstone. We talked a bit about it before we started recording. I learned about that just a couple of years ago, and I found it very interesting. So could you tell us a bit about me what Sunstone is?
So in the either late 70s, I think it was the late 70s, maybe early 80s, there were a bunch of people had gone to BYU and they wanted to either do history or do, like journalism or something like that. And they got together, and at that time, Leonard Arrington was the church historian, and it was must have been like known on the street that he was interested in having more history be researched and be put out by the church. And so anyhow, these young people got together and created something that they called Sunstone, a magazine that would help promote um, authors of papers, people who are historians, and they did a research project, and they wanted to give these people a venue to be published so that they can be encouraged, to do more. And so they created Sunstone as like a magazine for these things. And then they decided to have meetings in the summer where they call them symposia, where they would present their papers and meet each other and network and do things like that. And it grew a lot and it became very popular in the late 80s. And then unfortunately, the church started to discourage external programs that were going on that weren't like BYU or church education system related. And so they kind of took a hit in their interest, but they stayed alive. And then around the early 2000s, they had some new vibrant leadership come in, and they started thinking about, the internet, and they could reach more people if they did a podcast about it, or if they recorded the sessions and the presentations and then had them available online, and maybe that would get more people to join. It's a membership driven organization. And so lately they've been having mostly in Utah get-togethers in the summer, and I think they do something in England as well in the fall. And it's basically they've increased the scope. So where it used to be sort of like the Brighamite historians, the people in Utah, they expanded it to include all branches of Mormonism. And so they have a little saying, "There's more than one way to Mormon." This is a T-shirt I got there, and they really try to be welcoming. Probably about 1/3 of the people that attend are um, currently attending, Mormons, and 1/3 are maybe formerly attending Mormons, and 1/3 are people who are in different Mormon branches, like fundamentalist or the Church of Christ from back east, and other branches that use the Book of Mormon as one of their scriptures.
Thanks, Gene. In fact, I remember that I talked to friends a year ago when the last Sunstone took place. And I remember that Steve Pinecker said he was going to be the referee for a kickball game. And I remember that I told my friends that an evangelical would be a referee for a game between polygamous Mormons and ex-Mormons. And they looked at me like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, it's an odd bedfellows.
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting. And like your shirt says, one more than one way to be Mormon. And sometimes people, and this would be my last question, but sometimes people think, oh, um, maybe the Brighamite LDS church in Utah would say, uh, well, why would I talk to, I don't know, maybe Bickertonite if I don't agree with what he says, or why would I talk to Gene? He's not a believing member. What's the purpose? And sometimes I hear that a lot about either interfaith within Mormonism and also interfaith in general. But I wanted to ask you, uh, why do you think it, or what benefits do you see in interfaith dialogue, in this case, like at Soundstone? And what would you say to maybe people who say it it's not useful?
So I would say that, depending on your belief in how old the earth is, at least going back thousands of years, humans have developed systems of either religion or some type of ceremony or practice that, was a way to bring communities together. And, but at the same time, if some other community did something different than you, that would be a limiting factor, right? And, when thousands of years ago, when you had to be wary of groups or neighbors or people that looked different from you or spoke different from you, that was a way that you would use to protect yourself and your community. But now we realize that we're all really all part of the human race, and we are on this planet together, and we should all try to do our best to, for whatever reasons, we should be friends with everybody, and just different beliefs. It's like, it'd be almost like if the people who believed in Santa Claus were against the people that believed in the tooth fairy, right? It's like, oh, our belief is better than yours. It doesn't really matter. Everybody likes candy, everybody likes presents. you know, everybody loses their teeth. Everybody wants to experience something, about life that's just kind of fun. And we could all, learn from stuff like that. And I just think that we all have similar experiences, right? We all breathe the same air. We all try to eat the same food, just about. We all drive cars or have neighbors or, watch TV. And, the Olympics is kind of a thing that was brought in to try to get, countries together. And so, humanity's trying to be together, right? We're trying to be less prejudiced with other people, trying to be more open. And, that's pretty much, I think, what people really want, but then their fears set in and they become afraid of some other group. And they just have to, learn more maybe about the other groups.
Thank you, Gene. And uh, I honestly think you're one of the kindest people I've met. So I thank you for that. I thank you for the kindness you've shown me, and the friendship too. I was glad to talk to you, to get to know a bit more about your story, as well as of your own interests. Uh, I hope that when I upload these videos, we can encourage that communication. So thank you, Gene. And before
Try.
we wrap up, do you have any last words?
Well, thank you very much for your friendship. I've appreciated that you came on my show, trusted Steve Pinecker enough to say, okay. And yeah, I consider you like my first interview, even though I really did interview Steve first.
Esperen los siguientes episodios para platicar con más personas, poder crear un poco más de empatía, de conexión, y nos vemos en el próximo video.